All right, so we did charismatic leadership and transformational leadership. I covered the definition, background, and some traits of charismatic leadership. I don't feel like the book gave a very good standard definition for charismatic leadership, so I did a little research on my own. I looked up the definitions for charisma, charismatic, and leadership. These are all terms that have very broad and general definitions and have multiple definitions depending on who you ask. Charisma is a spiritual power or personal quality that gives an individual influence of authority over large numbers of people. Charismatic is just having or portraying charisma, and leadership is the position or function of a leader, a person who guides or directs a group. Therefore, I came up with my own kind of general definition of what I feel charismatic leadership is, which is when a leader uses unique or extraordinary personal qualities to lead, influence, and provide authority over a large number of people. Both charismatic and transformational leadership sort of originated in the 1980s. Those studying leadership wanted to better understand how some leaders could influence their followers to make self-sacrifices and to put the organization's needs ahead of their own. Max Weber had one of the original theories on charismatic leadership. He believed that charismatic leadership often took place in times of crisis, where a leader would emerge with a radical vision. The leader then promotes a certain ideology to their followers. If followers experience success from these ideologies, then they begin to see their leader as extraordinary. There are two more recent theories that are related to charismatic leadership as well. The first is the attribution theory of charismatic leadership, and the second is self-concept theory of charismatic leadership. The attribution theory is when followers attribute charismatic qualities towards their leaders based on expertise and behavior. And then self-concept is when charismatic leaders use various processes to influence their followers. The attribution theory, the behaviors that charismatic leaders are more likely to display are novel and appealing vision, and that's when a leader creates the radical vision I mentioned earlier. It does not fall in with the status quo. Charismatic leaders are more likely to appeal to their followers by playing on their emotions and values, and they will also use innovative strategies which appear successful to impress their followers. Charismatic leaders are also often use confidence and optimism to appeal to their followers and portray themselves as making many self-sacrifices. And then lastly, the self-concept theory. The charismatic leaders use influence processes. There are several of these that apply to charismatic leadership. Personal identification is when a follower strongly identifies with the leader and changes their behavior to reflect that of the leader. There's also social identification, in which members of the group take pride in being similar to the leader and other members. Internalization occurs when members commit to the charismatic leader's mission or vision. Charismatic leaders use self and collective efficacy to empower the group of followers and to achieve tasks. And then finally, a charismatic leader can alter the group's mood to be more enthusiastic or positive through emotional contagion.
Throughout history, there have been many charismatic leaders. Some of the best leaders in history were considered charismatic leaders who influenced and were committed to their cause. There have been many bad leaders as well who share the same charismatic leadership traits. Charismatic leader fun facts. Most charismatic leaders are self-confident, novel, and have an appealing vision. They remain optimistic. They're willing to self-sacrifice for their greater good, and they're committed to their cause at any cost. Dr. Martin Luther King is a great example of a charismatic leader. He was born on January 15th, 1929. His civil rights career began with leading the bus boycott that Rosa Parks was arrested for in Montgomery, Alabama. Dr. King's speeches were powerful and emotional that instilled belief in peaceful protest and delivered energy towards his civil rights movement. Mother Teresa is another charismatic leader. She was born in Yugoslavia in 1910, where she joined the Sisters of Laredo when she was 18. In 1929, she moved to India, and in 1949, she pursued her calling and founded the Missionaries of Charity to live and serve in Calcutta. Through the 50s and 60s, she established a leper colony, an orphanage, nursing home, family clinics, and a string mobile clinics. By 1997, Missionaries of Charity had 4,000 sisters with 610 foundations in 123 countries. Her aspiring devout persona and devotion to a singular cause make her a charismatic leader. George Washington was the founder of this country. As a visionary leader, he developed an organization with a culture which achieved the goal and won the war on independence. As a visionary leader, Washington also attracted both military and civilians to follow him to victory. He excelled equally in maintaining coherence between long-term goals and specific current actions. Adolf Hitler was also considered a charismatic leader. During World War II, Hitler voluntarily enrolled in the German army, and his experience greatly shaped the political ideas he later formed with the outcome of World War II and the humiliation of Germany. Although at the beginning of Hitler's adult career he was shy, but after his experience in World War I, he could deliver powerful speeches to large crowds. His speeches were built upon feelings that were already present in German society, but Hitler was able to speak to them out loud.
So we're going to move ahead now into transformational leadership. And in this section of the presentation, we'll first look at ways that transformational leadership is distinct from charismatic. Then we'll look at how it has been contrasted with transactional leadership, and then do a definition of transformational leadership, talk about what it is before concluding with characteristics or traits of transformational leaders. So first of all, there's a lot of discussion about whether transformational leadership really is different at all from charismatic. And there are several points, I think, that can be made that would show that it is different, at least distinct in some ways. First of all, because transformational leadership does not include an emphasis on attributed charisma and personal identification to the degree that charismatic leadership does. So Bernard Bass points out that charisma is a necessary part of transformational leadership, but it's just not emphasized to the same degree. And instead, what's emphasized more is inspiring follower commitment, identification, and developing follower skills and collective efficacy. So a second way that transformational leadership is distinct from charismatic is because it generates less dependence on the leader rather than more dependence on the leader. So transformational leadership is about empowerment for the followers, not wanting the spotlight as much as a charismatic leader would want it. And then a third way that transformational leadership is distinct is because it's more common. It can apply across the board in various sectors and settings. It's much more prevalent in that way than charismatic leadership. Also, it's less dependent upon facilitating conditions. So like Melody was describing, and Lindsay, how there's certain settings in which a charismatic leader might emerge and hit the scene and really be praised. With transformational leadership, it can happen without that context. And then lastly, it's less polarizing than charismatic leadership often is. So I mentioned we also want to just give a little bit of thought to how transformational leadership is contrasted with transactional leadership. And one of the ways is by the effect of the leader on the followers. So with transformational leadership, followers end up with very positive feelings toward the leader. They have trust, they have admiration, loyalty, and respect for him or her. They're motivated to do more than they were originally expecting to do, and that's because they're empowered. Another way that transformational leadership is contrasted with transactional is by the motivating behaviors of the leader. So transformational leadership features inspirational motivation with an appealing vision, whereas transactional leadership seeks to motivate simply by clarifying how to get the rewards and how to avoid punishment or consequences. So that early on, as detailed studies of transformational leadership were emerging, this contrast was pivotal, leading the way into the study of transformational leadership. So what is it? Let's define it as other writers have done. Kouzes and Posner have described it by saying it's a model that encourages leaders to raise one another to higher levels of motivation and morality. So rather than being self-seeking, it needs of others and leadership with integrity, so that the leader models ideal behavior for the followers, and they're going to want to emulate him or her. Another definition from Perry and Proctor Thompson is that it's an ethical pursuit that fosters and requires a moral climate. And along those lines, James McGregor Burns, who is credited with first describing transformational leadership in detail, he said, transforming leadership ultimately becomes moral in that it raises the level of human conduct and ethical aspiration of both leader and the led, and thus it has a transforming effect on both. Bernard Bass, whom I mentioned earlier, and B.J. Avolio have described it as visioning, valuing, and empowering leaders. So 4 key tenets of transformational leadership that we need to take into consideration here. Number 1 is idealized influence. That is behavior that arouses strong emotions from followers and identification with a leader. So idealized influence is 1. Number 2, inspirational motivation, communicating with an appealing vision, using symbols to focus followers' efforts, and modeling appropriate behavior as well so that others can emulate it. Number 3, intellectual stimulation. So transformational leadership includes behavior that will increase follower awareness of problems and influence them to view problems from a new perspective. And then last, 4th, individualized consideration. So there really is more of a one-on-one relational component to transformational leadership that's characterized by providing support, encouragement, and coaching to followers. So the last thing we'll say here is just about transformational leaders themselves. They're charismatic people, and they often serve as an ideal for other members of their organization. They inspire and motivate their followers. They provide intellectual stimulation, and they pay considerate attention to their followers' needs. So like we said a moment ago, it's very tailored in these relationships, such that one size doesn't fit all. It seeks to identify strengths and weaknesses and base the leadership on those variations within followers.
All right, and I'm going to wrap up our presentation with some transformational leaders in history. So throughout history, there have been many transformational leaders, and they have been present across many cultures and fields and just different disciplines in general. And they've been known, just like the other kind, as positive and negative contributors to society. So my first positive example is going to be Barack Obama. He was our most recent president up until now. And he was really kind of seen as an inspirational motivator. He utilized his good speaking tactics to inspire others and create positive change. And in doing so with his ways, he was able to have the highest young people from like the demographic of 18 to 24 come out and vote. But he's charismatic, but he's also relatable. So that's a positive thing that he has. And then his action, he takes a lot of action and initiative. And then another person from history is Nelson Mandela. He was from South Africa, and he worked to abolish apartheid, and he brought about a lot of radical change in South Africa. He did this by listening to others and really getting down on the level of his followers to create his vision. He would go to a lot of home visits and learn about situations, and he would take that back and help him determine what he needed to do to make things better. So he led by example in getting to know others. And then from Amazon, we have the CEO. And in doing my research, I found a lot of really interesting stuff about him. He's currently viewed as the best living transformational leader out there right now. And that has a lot to do with all of the growth that Amazon has had in recent years and their really good performance. People, I don't think, had that high of expectations for Amazon, but they got in there. And through his work with all of his employees, he's just really done a lot of great things for the organization. And Jeff has received countless accolades, and he's always winning awards for his work with others. And then going along to have a negative, we have Kim Jong-il, and he was the dictator of North Korea, and he followed in his father's footsteps of being the dictator there. And he actually used transformational leadership for personal gains and kind of took the country in a very negative direction to make himself look better. So he used his power to influence his country in a very negative way. He would tell people that the rest of the world is evil and really isolated the country of North Korea through his power. And then I've got a fun little video about transformational leadership, but we'll let you all determine if it's transformational or charismatic leadership happening here.